Welcome into CBS News 24/7. I'm Elizabeth Cook. Tariff shock continues across the globe. World markets are reeling, and the U.S. stock market not faring much better. The Dow down more than 1,000 points this morning shortly after it opened. Now, there's a minimum baseline tariff of 10% on all U.S. trading partners. Countries currently charging the U.S. more than 10% in tariffs will be hit with a reciprocal tariff on top of the 10% that kicks in on April 9th. And these tariffs are impacting everything from imported cars from EU countries to even remote islands in the Arctic, where the only residents there are the penguins. We're going to have more on that a little bit later. But first, here's a closer look at just some of our biggest trading partners. Vietnam, they're going to face a reciprocal tariff of 46%. China, 34%. India, 27%. And EU countries were also hit with 20% levies. Now, Americans are expected to see higher prices on everything from toys and electronics to clothing and construction equipment from overseas. We have team coverage digging into these numbers. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is standing by for us. But first, let's go to CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, what are economists telling you about all this?
So what I'm hearing are a couple of things. This could lead to higher prices. We've talked about that before. And when you have higher prices, the inflation rate rises. This could also cause consumers to spend less, right? If things are costing more, there's not enough room in their budget because they're paying more for some of those essential items. And also all of this talk of tariff we have seen in so many of the recent consumer confidence surveys that the average American is getting a lot of anxiety about where the economy is going. And, you know, they may not be right, but how they feel can impact how they spend. And I zeroed in on consumer spending because it does drive 2/3 of GDP, of the economy here in this country. And so when you see consumers spend less, that's where you lead to the possibility of slowing growth. The other thing, though, that I will highlight that I'm hearing from economists is that long term, there are a lot of benefits to having more manufacturing in this country. A domestic supply chain that would have been really helpful for all the supply chain issues we had during COVID. You would have more American jobs potentially. There are drawbacks, right? It costs more to make things in America. Maybe not anymore with that tariff, certainly, and it also certainly takes a lot of time. But sort of you put all of these things together, I will also underscore that nothing in the economy happens in a vacuum. So yes, we're talking about the impact of tariffs, but there are going to be a lot of different dynamics at play beyond just tariffs in terms of how this economy looks over the next few years, Liz.
Yeah, and Kelly, we've seen today countries around the world are responding to all of this as we speak. What's the latest from Canada, though?
Yeah, so this just broke in the last hour. The Prime Minister had a news conference and said that they would be imposing a 25% tariff on cars coming from the U.S. that are not covered under that very key trade agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. You've heard it referred to probably as USMCA. And so this is essentially a tit for tat of what America has done to cars coming from Canada that are not covered under the USMCA. We have that 25% tariff that went into effect at midnight. So that's the latest there. There was a lot of intense rhetoric in that speech. It does seem like they are gearing up for a trade war. But Liz, we've talked about this before. It could also end up in a negotiation. So we're sort of wait and see mode in terms of the moves back and forth.
Yeah, that seems to be the theory that I'm hearing a lot today, Kelly, that this may just be kind of an invitation to the bargaining table by President Trump. And, you know, we knew that there was going to be pain in the markets today, maybe why the president delayed his announcement yesterday till after the markets closed. But what's the long game with this? Should we anticipate days like this on Wall Street for the immediate future?
It's possible. Investors often have knee-jerk reactions, and that's why you see, even over the past few weeks, you know, one day it drops by 500 points, the Dow, and then the next day it's up. And so you see those fluctuations. In terms of long term, let's say over the next year, I think that the really down days are going to be if these tariff announcements start to be borne out in the hard economic data. So do we get bad news when it comes to inflation, to consumer spending, all of those things that I mentioned earlier in our conversation? That's what's really going to move the markets because investors will see that as problematic for companies' profits and the consumer at large, Liz.
All right, CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady, thank you so much. Well, you can check out our tariff price tracker at cbsnews.com/tariffs. All right, let's go now to CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. She's been standing by very patiently for us. Thank you, Nancy. This reciprocal aspect of this doesn't go into effect until April 9th. Is there still time here for other countries to negotiate? What are you hearing?
That is a very good question, Liz, with a very complicated answer because we are getting different messages from different Trump officials about that. On the record, for example, the Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, was asked this morning, can countries negotiate before the deadline? She said she believes so. But then Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, was asked something similar, and she said this is not a negotiation. The president's own son, Eric Trump, said countries better be lining up to negotiate first. But then Secretary Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, was asked about that, and he said no. Negotiation means talking. We don't want talking. We want to see action. We want to see these countries taking action. And so it's very unclear what countries should be doing. And just to make things even more murky, there are a few countries that did take action, like Secretary Lutnick has advised. Israel, for example, eliminated its tariffs on U.S. goods before the president even made his announcement yesterday, and yet Israel was still hit with a new 17% tariff. So it is very unclear what countries should be doing right now.
Yeah, I heard Lutnick earlier this morning, Nancy, give this analogy that the reason for all of these tariffs is that all these countries have been living essentially in a house owned by the United States for years and eating food for free and, driving the cars essentially for free. And now what the U.S. is doing is asking these countries to pay up. But that's the reason for all of this. And, Trump has been talking about tariffs for 30 years, well before he ever ran for president. But we know he cares about public perception. So how is the White House responding to how the markets are doing today?
They say this is a blip and that the ship will be righted quickly. And they have a message for Wall Street. They're basically saying, don't freak out, don't overreact. Everything is going to be fine. But obviously, the markets are getting inputs from all over the world and near unanimity from economists that this is going to be very problematic, that it is going to cause prices to rise, that it's going to cause unemployment to rise. And so it's not surprising that the markets here in the U.S. have been rattled today.
And Nancy, I want to pivot to another big story happening where you are. Layoffs just hit staffers at the National Security Council. What are we learning about that?
What we've learned is that at least 3 NSC staffers have been let go so far, and it sounds like more firings are coming. This is happening after the president met yesterday with Laura Loomer, who is a right-wing personality. She does not have a role in this White House, but she's a sometime travel companion of President Trump. She came here to the White House yesterday, sat down with him, and according to sources who spoke to Margaret Brennan and to Jennifer Jacobs, she presented President Trump with opposition research on NSC staffers who she considers either not sufficiently loyal or as having neoconservative views. And the firing took place after that. And these are not just minor staffers. By the way, Liz, these are Brian Walsh. He's the senior director for intelligence at the NSC. The senior director for legislative affairs at the NSC was let go as well. And again, we are expecting that these firings are not over yet.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see with that. All right, Nancy Cordes, thank you so much for being with us. Now this, a trail of destruction left behind in the Southwest and the Midwest. Violent storms and tornadoes tore through cities from Oklahoma to Indiana. This video out of Jeffersontown, Kentucky, where storms ripped roofs off buildings and left just a mess of debris scattered around the city. And in Michigan, heavy rain flooded neighborhoods, turning streets into rivers and also filling up basements. This video is out of Dearborn Heights, where the flooding was high enough to almost reach car windows. And to Indiana, heavy winds ripped apart a huge distribution center in the city of Brownsburg, exposing the roof and causing a partial collapse. Now, one of the hardest hit areas was southwestern Tennessee, where at least 4 people died after multiple tornadoes hit that area. Let's go to CBS News correspondent Nicole Valdez in Nashville, where folks are dealing with major flooding. Nicole, I see how just wet it looks behind you there. What are you seeing?
Liz, this gives you a bit of an idea of just how fluid the situation is. 10 minutes ago, I would not have been able to stand on the sidewalk here. You'll notice it's now covered in mud, a little bit of water left behind, but at one point we're talking inches of water here. And it wasn't just standing water, it was rushing from the creeks and rivers that flow through the city. And going so fast, it was able to, look at this, you don't see this every day, uproot entire plants and leave them sitting here on this bike rack. You'll notice all the mud, all the rocks here. This is what's left behind now that we have a break in the rain, and this road was able to dry off a bit. In fact, we had Office of Emergency Management crews. They were here and they had to block it off at one point to traffic. They've just reopened that. But again, as you sort of see these plants, you can also notice that they're all leaning to the side a bit, right? Showing you the pressure and the force of all that water as it moved from the creeks and the rivers nearby onto these major roadways. We know there are dozens right now that are closed, and that includes parts of several major freeways. I mean, we're talking I-65 and I-40 here, all places that have been busy this morning that have had to close at least some of the lanes because of standing water there. We are still right now in a flash flood warning for Nashville. That's until about 3 p.m. local time here, and that's because they're expecting a lot more rain to fall, not only in the course of today, but that rain will stick around through the weekend. So all the flooding you've seen today is really just the beginning of what is expected to be a multi-day threat.
Yeah, so many people are impacted by this, Nicole. How are rescue crews responding, getting people to safety, and where are they taking them?
Well, for now, what we know is that those homes that are in areas that have flooded, we've seen emergency management crews hopping onto boats to get to those homes and get people out. Those are really those living in the lower lying areas, right? So for now, it's really just responding to calls of people who do need help or who find themselves driving through roads like this that were once underwater, not realizing how deep it was. For now, I think it's really still about the messaging of try to either stay off the road or know if you should leave your home before you find yourself stuck in it because of that standing water. We've heard of a couple rescues and a lot of, again, road closures, but I think at this point it's for people, really it's just a messaging of precaution that, again, there is a lot more rain ahead of us here.
Yeah, all right, Nicole Valdez, thank you so much. I want to bring Jessica Birch talking about this incoming storm. I mean, they're not out of this yet, right?
No, and she made a comment earlier just about how she's still in a flash flood zone area. I mean, in that whole area, we've been either dealing with flood warnings, advisories, or flash flood warnings, and we're going to continue to see that as we head into this weekend's forecast. From now until this weekend, this system, it doesn't move much, and so it's going to bring in heavy amounts of rain. Anywhere up to around a foot of rain is expected in areas where she's even at, and so it's worth noting that's one problem, but the damaging winds and the tornado activity, that's the other big issue when it comes to this severe weather that's impacting over 70 million Americans right now. We watch it strengthen as we head into the coming days. This is our forecast and models. Watch how it becomes widespread anywhere from northern Texas over into Arkansas. Arkansas is going to get the brunt of this system. It pushes over the Mississippi, north closer to Kentucky, and all the way over into Tennessee, too. And with that, we're going to keep a close eye on how that severe weather is already impacting these communities, but will continue to do so as we head into this weekend. Right around the corner, I mean, so far we've seen 21 tornadoes reported. We're going to watch that number add up as we head into the afternoon hours today, evening hours tonight, all throughout Friday's forecast. And on top of that, the wind has been so impactful. We've seen gusts up to around 50, 60 miles per hour. Tornado activity is prevalent too. And we watch the storm. Notice how it's just fueled in the exact same direction over the Mississippi, over into states closer to Tennessee, Kentucky, pushing up into the Ohio Valley. But on the back end of that, Arkansas is covered completely with that enhanced risk as we head into the afternoon hours today. Now you turn the page into tomorrow, flash flooding and flooding advisories will continue to become widespread throughout southern parts of Illinois, Indiana, where we can continue to see anywhere up to around a foot of rain, like I mentioned earlier, from today into our forecasted hours tomorrow throughout these exact areas. We advance the clock to Saturday. Notice how it doesn't tilt too much more forward. Usually these storm systems come and go pretty fast, pushing off to the east. This has different characteristics, and that's the reason why why we could see major flooding into all these communities. Like I said earlier, too, over 70 million people impacted by this, whether we're talking about damaging winds in your neighborhoods or tornado activity that we've been reporting all morning long, or on top of that, of course, the flooding that we've been seeing.
And this storm system is just stubborn. It's just going to stay in this area for multiple days.
At least until this weekend, yeah.
All right, Jess, thank you so much.
Of course.
Well, coming up, thousands of people line the streets in Lithuania, all to bid farewell to 4 American soldiers. Stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7. An emotional ceremony held in Lithuania today, paying tribute to 4 fallen U.S. soldiers. Thousands of people lined the streets as a priest blessed the hearses carrying the bodies of the 4 men. The Army soldiers died when their vehicles sank into a bog close to the border with Belarus. They were taking part in training exercises when they were first reported missing last week. All right, turning our attention now to Capitol Hill, where a handful of Senate Republicans have joined forces with Democrats in an effort to stop President Trump's tariffs on Canada. Now, the Senate passed a resolution to revoke the tariffs on Canadian goods last night. 2 Virginia Democrats sponsored that bill. 4 Republicans also voted in favor of it. Those senators are Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Mitch McConnell, and Rand Paul.
Have you seen the stock market this morning?
I've looked at it a couple of times.
Are you concerned?
Yep.
My own constituents voted for this. It's not like Donald Trump is surprising anybody. He has signaled his strong support for tariffs from the beginning. He's exercised it in the past. And with that, he got 66% of the vote in North Dakota. So with this promise, they trusted him. And so, yeah, I'm comfortable with where my constituents are on it. I spent a lot of time talking to them about it. I spent a lot of time talking to Canadians about it, my neighbors and friends and family in Canada. You cannot make a day a trend, or even a week or a month a trend.
All right, let's get right to CBS News congressional reporter Torian Small on Capitol Hill for us today. Torian, how are lawmakers reacting to the president's tariff announcement? And a second question, too, is this bill going anywhere beyond the Senate, do you think?
Yeah, Liz, outside of those 4 Republican defectors, every other Republican senator we've talked to has come to the defense of Donald Trump, like we heard from the senator from Oklahoma there, I believe, Mike Rounds. So many senators on the Hill. They believe that voters, in fact, sent a mandate to Washington by voting in Donald Trump. And Trump, one of his biggest platforms, is running on these tariffs that we ultimately saw happen. But through this resolution that passed the Senate chambers, through the support of 4 Republicans, they're looking to revoke that national emergency declaration Donald Trump did in order to justify these tariffs on Canada. This is something that conflicted with Senator Paul of Kentucky, who has been this free trade absolutist, saying that this could only disrupt and hurt the U.S. economy. Where it goes from here is potentially to the House. We know that Congressman Meeks, the ranking Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, has his own version of this resolution that he's looking to put out. The threshold is a bit harder for Democrats to pass, considering they would now need more Republicans to join on to this, and considering 2 new Republicans were just sworn in last night from Florida special election, that might not be an option, Liz.
And Torian, Senate Republicans have also released their budget plan, which, by the way, is a blueprint for implementing Trump's agenda. No surprise there. So what's in this, and what's the next step?
Yeah, this one's closely aligned with the House version of the CR, or budget resolution, that passed not too long ago. The biggest issue here was there were 2 conflicting bills that came out of both chambers, both spearheaded by Republicans, of course, but they didn't have necessarily the same top line that would align them in order to get to the president's desk and ultimately pass through reconciliation process. This one, though, also includes a $5 trillion increase of the federal debt limit. That is one that could be a challenge for these Republicans. Rand Paul, again, becoming a usual suspect in defecting here, is looking to push forward his own version of an amendment to this big budget resolution that would see the debt limit increase instead by $500 billion instead of $5 trillion. That would give Congress a few months to then have to go through this debate again instead of pushing this off that the $5 trillion mark would do to the midterms times here. Ultimately, though, this is something that the president says he is on board with. He put out a post on his Truth Social page saying that he is firmly behind Leader Thune and says that he supports the Senate version of this bill in order to make his tax cuts permanent and some of the other legislative priorities that he's pushing here. Liz, in terms of the process, procedural vote could happen as early as this evening. That would then kick off debate. I've been here on the Hill for about 7 years now. I'm in the unenviable position of covering what's known as voter-rama, which is where senators can introduce unlimited amounts of amendments that could take this into the wee hours. Senate Republicans are hoping that a final vote on this budget reconciliation bill could happen as early as Saturday morning. So that means a long night for all of us here on the Hill.
Voter-rama. I have not heard that yet, but I love it. I think you should have a bingo game with all of the different players and all the different amendments there. All right, Torian Small, thanks so much for joining us on Capitol Hill. All right, meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Brussels today meeting with NATO foreign ministers. His goal here, to reassure them that the United States is committed to the NATO alliance. European allies expressed concern, though, over President Trump's agenda, including a trade war and relations with Russia. So let's bring in CBS News correspondent Chanel Call. She's in the newsroom for more on Rubio's visit. Chanel, what have you been hearing about this?
Well, the timing here of this meeting between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and NATO leaders is just so key. You mentioned this. It comes as tensions between the U.S. and Europe certainly are rising, particularly over the war in Ukraine. And, of course, trade is a big issue right now. Rubio's visit notably coming one day after President Donald Trump just announced tariffs of 20% on imports from the European Union. But today, Liz, Rubio showed up in Brussels with a reassuring message about President Donald Trump's views on the alliance. Listen.
He's not against NATO. He is against a NATO that does not have the capabilities that it needs to fulfill the obligations that the treaty imposes upon each and every member state. And it wants our nation, and no one expects that you're going to be able to do this in 1 year or two, but the pathway has to be real. This is a hard truth, but it is a basic one that needs to be said now. In order for us to prove, and in order for us to build the kind of NATO that has the capability to defend the territories of our nation states and deter any action that would be aggressive against any one of us. So I hope to have a chance to engage on that here today in our conversations. I'm sure we will. Of course, we're also happy to be joined by our Indo-Pacific partners who have become great partners to the alliance as we also see increased threats to both freedom of navigation and territorial integrity in the Indo-Pacific.
And so again, Liz, the big central message coming from Secretary of State Marco Rubio there is the U.S. certainly stays committed to NATO, but also is asking Europe to spend more on defense in the coming years.
All right, CBS News correspondent Chanel Call, thank you so much. Protesters making their voices heard at Tufts University. Another student arrested by ICE agents because of her alleged support for Palestinians. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Video to our map taking you to Massachusetts, where protesters gathered at Tufts University this week as a doctoral student fights her deportation in court today. They rallied in support of the student who was detained by immigration agents last week. Now, the hearing on that detained Tufts student is expected to start in about an hour. CBS News Boston's Tiffany Chan is outside the federal court with a preview.
Tufts University is calling on ICE to release that grad student, Rameza Ozturk, as the case goes before a federal judge in Boston this afternoon. Now, the video has gone viral at this point, showing Ozturk being taken into ICE custody on a Somerville sidewalk by plainclothes agents. It sparked outrage and rallies in and around Tufts campus. Ozturk's lawyer says she's here on an F-1 visa and has no prior criminal history. The State Department claims Ozturk supports Hamas, pointing to an op-ed that she wrote for the school paper about Palestine. And as a result, they revoked her visa. Now, the big question is, will Ozturk be able to return to Massachusetts, or will she remain in ICE custody? That's what the federal judge is going to consider today. And at last check, Ozturk was taken to a detention center in Louisiana. Outside of Boston Federal Court, I'm Tiffany Chan. Back to you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tiffany. A lot happening with this case. Let's bring in our Justice Department correspondent, Scott McFarland, to break down the situation. Scott, what are we looking for today?
Well, this hearing is a singular case, but has the prospect of impacting other cases. If you look at the case of the Tufts University student, you have one of a kind, a 30-year-old doctoral student from Turkey who is fighting to stay in the country and fight this deportation, but you also have this sense that she is fighting a fight that others may benefit from or be casualties of, because the administration has been pretty unequivocal and declarative in saying they are going to target students who are on visas who they believe have been supporting Hamas. Ms. Ozturk denies that allegation. The university has spoken out on her behalf, saying nothing she did on campus gave any indication that that's a problem with Ms. Ozturk. But as this plays out at the federal courthouse in Boston, you could see other dominoes potentially falling in other cases involving other students.
Yeah, Scott, while I have you here, I want to ask you about a different hearing. Judge James Boasberg will determine whether the Trump administration violated his order temporarily blocking the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members under the Alien Enemies Act. So what are we going to be looking for there?
Oh, you need a really good score sheet and a very full pen to keep track of all the court cases involving all the Trump executive orders. You got to be after it. That said, this one's different, and this one is singularly important. This goes back to the March 15th deportation of those Venezuelan nationals, the ones that happened on a weekend. The Trump administration alleged they were gang members. You'll recall the judge here in Washington ordered the planes turned around, if necessary, because he wanted a closer look at these cases because the administration invoked this 18th century rarely used law to expedite the deportations. They didn't turn the planes around, and in the 3 weeks since, they have yet to answer the judge's questions unambiguously about why his orders were refused or not complied with. He's going to press them today in court, and you have a bigger issue here, much bigger than just those Venezuelan nationals, whether court orders are going to be disregarded by the executive branch. If so, that is destabilizing for democracy.
I want to pivot for a moment to tariffs here, Scott. You've got some reporting about how the DOJ is getting involved and is preparing to enforce them as well. What do you know?
Everybody has a piece of this if there are going to be these prohibitive tariffs that could shake up trade in the world and the U.S. economy. If the tariffs are prohibitive, if they cause a lot of pain, legal experts say there could be a bunch of people trying to get things across the border or into the U.S. unlawfully, which could sprout this surge of what they call False Claims Act prosecutions. People will have to be prosecuted for trying to bypass the tariffs. The Department of Justice, in a statement to CBS News as the afternoon began, says they have the resources ready to handle False Claim Act cases as they surface. One of the many things to watch as this tariff battle plays out.
Another big headline we've been following today, Scott, is the firings at the NSC. And this all came after President Trump met with a woman who is a, for the better part of a word, conspiracy theorist. What can you tell us about this woman and the people that were let go?
Her name is Laura Loomer. She is a very popular, though very polarizing social media figure and right-wing figure. She has traded in conspiracy theories historically. According to the latest reporting, she met with President Trump over the past few days and encouraged the firing or the removal of several National Security Council employees. And CBS News has confirmed in the time since that meeting, multiple National Security Council figures have been removed. Our own reporting here at the CBS News Justice Department unit is that there was also a federal prosecutor on the West Coast who was removed recently by the White House directly, which is not customary, after this woman, Laura Loomer, posted on social media that he should be fired. She has the ear of the president, which outside of these firings concerns any number of people here in Washington.
You need a binder to keep track of all these, or you need a Scott McFarland that you can call at a moment's notice to keep track of all these cases going on, or all these events going on really across Washington. Thank you so much, Scott. Well, Reagan National Airport in D.C. on deck for some major changes after that deadly crash involving a Black Hawk helicopter and even reports of a brawl between air traffic controllers. We'll have more on that coming up. Stay with us. New York City Mayor Eric Adams running for re-election as, get this, an independent. He made the announcement on X this morning saying he's still a Democrat, but there isn't, quote, liberal or conservative way to fix New York City. Well, this comes just one day after a federal judge dismissed the corruption charges against him. Costa Rican authorities confirmed carbon monoxide poisoning killed the son of former New York Yankee Brett Gardner. Investigators said that when testing Miller Gardner's body, they found the amount of carbon monoxide that bonded with the 14-year-old's blood exceeded the lethal limit. Gardner died March 21st while staying with his family in a hotel in Costa Rica. Changes are coming to Washington's Reagan National Airport after a deadly accident 2 months ago. Now, the airport has also seen a series of other problems, including a reported brawl involving air traffic controllers. Meanwhile, a Republican senator says the Army needs to improve its own flight safety record. CBS News correspondent Chris Van Cleve has more.
In the wake of January's deadly mid-air collision, several recent close calls, and just last week a fight in the tower at Washington's Reagan National Airport, the Federal Aviation Administration is making changes. The agency said it is increasing supervision and support for staff while reviewing arrival rates, which it says are disproportionately concentrated in the last 30 minutes of each hour.
They're trying to spread this out a little bit and lessen the workload on those air traffic controllers. They've got a very demanding job, and we need to make sure that we're looking out for their well-being as well as that of the flying public.
The NTSB is still investigating that mid-air collision between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and an American Airlines regional jet that killed 67 people.
That crash was horrific and it was preventable.
Senator Ted Cruz is demanding the Army release a memo detailing its limited use of a safety system that broadcasts an aircraft's position.
If another Black Hawk helicopter strikes another passenger jet and murders 67 people, because the Army refused to change its policy of turning off ADS-B out, those deaths will be on the Army's hands.
A CBS News analysis of available FAA data over a 34-year stretch shows nearly 25% of reported near mid-air collisions involved at least one military aircraft, even though those flights make up only about 2% of miles flown each year. Chris Van Cleve, CBS News, Washington.
President Trump's sweeping tariffs are expected to reshape the global economy, and we're seeing growing concerns, from our most powerful trading partners. CBS News foreign correspondent Remy Inocencio is in London with a harsh warning from the president of the EU.
Yes, UK stocks hit lows of the day after Prime Minister Keir Starmer met with British business leaders at 10 Downing Street on those new Trump tariffs. He warned that there will be an economic impact, but his government will act with cool and calm heads, negotiating with Washington in the hopes of some kind of what he calls best deal for Britain. And I want to point out, too, that the bosses of AstraZeneca, BAE, and Jaguar Land Rover were there. And the optics are hugely important because their companies represent some of the top export sectors to the United States, namely pharma, aerospace, machinery, and automobiles, easily totaling $25 billion in value last year, at least. But while there is anxiety, there is also perhaps a little bit of relief here because the U.S.'s new tariffs on UK exports is just 10%. And I say just because it could have been even worse. About 70 other countries have been hit with higher rates. China's now is at 34%. Vietnam's been hit with a 46% rate, and Taiwan has been hit by a 32% rate. Meanwhile, the EU has been slapped with a 20% tariff. So the UK has been relatively spared by comparison. And for now, it appears that there will be no knee-jerk reaction from the UK. Starmer says that the decisions will be made in the coming days and the coming weeks. Expanding this even wider, the EU is also weighing in. EU leaders and European business federations are now calling meetings. And it's got a feeling of a kind of huddle time across the continent to figure out next steps. And from EU leadership themselves, we've got a warning that all businesses, big and small, will suffer from day one. Here's the president of the European Commission talking about chaos. Take a listen.
The costs of doing business with the United States will drastically increase. And what is more, there seems to be no order in the disorder, no clear path through the complexity and chaos that is being created as all U.S. trading partners are hit.
And French President Emmanuel Macron called an emergency meeting with business leaders. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that it was an attack on a system that America itself helped achieve post-World War II. Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni, who was the only EU leader to attend Trump's inauguration, said that his tariffs were actually wrong. Now, bringing this all home to something everyone can absolutely understand, von der Leyen hit this home saying that millions of citizens will face higher grocery bills, medication will cost more, along with transportation. Inflation, she said, will go up, and that is not what Trump was elected to do. Back to you.
Ramy, thank you so much. Well, penguins are the only ones living on this remote island, and even they are being slapped with tariffs. I'm not kidding. Stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7. CBS News is proud of our Eye on America series because it keeps us rooted in our value of community-based journalism. A lot of loss for people living in Southern California because of those wildfires in the LA area earlier this year. The Kiefer family lost their home in the Palisades Fire, and they feared a similar fate for their beloved companion who was inadvertently left behind. But as CBS News Los Angeles' Elise Martinez shows us, their 5-year-old cat miraculously survived.
For a small little Maine Coon cat, she is pretty tough.
Tough may be an understatement. Aggie the cat has clawed her way back after surviving for 2 months alone in the wreckage of the Palisades Fire.
We're talking about you, sweetheart. Yeah.
82-year-old Catherine Kiefer feared her beloved companion had died after the fire leveled their home. The skittish cat had gone into hiding as the family fled the flames, Kiefer going back several times to search for Aggie.
I was haunted by the fact that she was there waiting for us and we never showed up.
Months went by. Then Kiefer got a call from the West Los Angeles Animal Shelter telling her they located Aggie.
They found her on our street near our house. We kept thinking, how in the heck did she survive? I mean, there was nothing around.
Burned and close to dying of starvation, Aggie was given 2 blood transfusions at the hospital.
They saved her.
The heartfelt reunion captured on video by Kiefer's daughter, Carolyn, going viral online.
Hi, Aggie, Kit. Oh, I'm so I never thought I'd see you again.
Kiefer, who is battling lung cancer, overwhelmed with emotion, telling us that Aggie had been by her side as she underwent treatment.
We're so lucky and so grateful. Someone said, how does it feel living the miracle? And I said, I have to keep pinching myself and I have to keep thinking I'm not going to just wake up and it's a dream.
The dream of Aggie finally coming home is now a reality. While she is half her body weight and still under vet supervision, Aggie is living proof that maybe cats do have 9 lives.
My new bumper sticker is going to be, don't underestimate cats.
I'm Elise Martinez, CBS News, Los Angeles.
What an amazing story. I'm so happy Aggie is okay. Has a great owner there. Lots of love. Well, we continue to follow the damage left behind by the severe weather that ripped through much of the Midwest and the South. This tornado was spotted in Lake City, Arkansas. That's near the northeast corner of the state. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca walks us through some of the damage there.
Well, almost on cue, Vlad, there's thunder that you may be able to hear behind us, and there's a line of clouds behind us. That's what we're kind of keeping an eye on right now. We're not expecting anything tornadic, but the National Weather Service this is their words. They say the rain over the next few days could be considered generational. But what the people are worried about right now is what's happening over my shoulder right now. A tornado did touch down here. You can see the roof of that building, of that home right there, ripped off. The walls peeled away. That red car that's right there, it used to be in the driveway, but the force of that storm pushed it off. So right now it's cleanup, but they're trying to do it in between rain spurts that are coming, and this rain is not going to stop for a few days.
What stuck out to me from that, Jess, he said this rain is going to be generational. I mean, I think people don't quite understand what that means.
It's hard to, because when you look at storms like the one that happened earlier this week on Monday, it sweeps throughout these communities. Yeah, you have a moment of heavy rain for maybe a few days, but when you're taking a look at the characteristics from this one, it's not moving. So we're talking about a foot of rain expected from now until this weekend in communities. That's just in total from these storms, not accumulated from other spots that are flooding and ponding. No, that's in total in some of these areas. And so we're not only concerned about, of course, flash flooding and potential for extreme flooding widespread throughout these valleys, we're also concerned about tornado activity and winds too. That's been the other big story for us. And so let's dive into the map real quick, because we're not done just yet. We kicked off this week with storms sweeping a little bit more south, closer to Alabama and Georgia. Now this next system that's on the back end of that, it's still packing its punch. We're expecting anywhere up to around a foot of rain. We're also expecting wind gusts up to around 60, 70 miles per hour. And to add to that, we're talking about flash flooding widespread throughout communities anywhere from Arkansas, Louisiana, all the way up into the Great Lakes and everywhere in between. Take a look behind me. A couple of things I want to talk about. So far, we've seen over 21 tornado reports from this storm alone, and we are still adding them up. We're not done just yet. To add to that, we're also seeing reports coming from these thunderstorms with hail widespread throughout these communities, almost 100 reports of hail so far. And this is just this afternoon alone. We extend into our Friday forecast, all the way into our Saturday forecast. Do you see how this isn't moving? It's almost acting like a funnel of just rain consistent over these states. And that's the reason why localized flooding is going to become more widespread into the coming days. Here's where our severe weather outlook is looking today. Mostly over Arkansas, but this does stretch over into areas like Nashville and northern portions of Mississippi. We could see strong winds throughout this community these communities as we head into this afternoon. And now we're watching the flash flood warning advisories become more widespread throughout all these states. We turn the page into our forecast tomorrow. Notice how it doesn't tilt much. We turn our page into our Saturday. We slowly start to see it move its way closer to the northeast. Liz?
Jess, thank you. Well, on this icy island, the biggest consumers that you'll see are king penguins and elephant seals eating fish. You will not find any human shoppers on this uninhabited herd island. They can't live there. And yet it's still being targeted by President Trump's tariffs. Herd, along with the McDonald Islands, are Australian territories in the Arctic. And even though they both have no human inhabitants, the White House slapped them with 10% tariffs. They're both considered one of the more remote locations on the planet. And to get there, you need to travel 2 weeks by boat from Perth, Australia. And that's not all. These other Australian external territories are also being targeted on the same list as China, India, and the EU. Norfolk Island is home to 2,000 people, about 600 miles off eastern Australia. But it was actually hit with some of the highest duties at almost 30%. That's way steeper than the 10% tariffs on mainland Australia. And the Prime Minister there said he's not quite sure why.
Norfolk Island, interestingly, is I think 29%. I'm not sure what Norfolk Island major exports are to the United States and why it's been singled out, but it has.
I want to hear what the penguins have to say about all this. Well, the Cocos Islands and Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean are also facing 10% tariffs there. All right, we're going to have much more right here on CBS News 24/7. Watching the markets react to Trump's sweeping tariffs, sending shockwaves through Wall Street and across the globe, and a court hearing just minutes away for the tough student arrested by ICE. Lindsay Reiser is next right here on CBS News 24/7.